Today, we delve into the dark and controversial history of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, a police force that left a deep scar on Northern Ireland. For decades, the R.u.c. was tasked with maintaining order during one of the most turbulent periods in modern European history, a period known as the Troubles. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack the complex and often uncomfortable legacy of the R.u.c., examining its controversial tactics, its relationship with loyalist paramilitaries, and its impact on the lives of ordinary people caught in the crossfire. From its inception, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, or R.u.c., was plagued by accusations of sectarian bias, with the vast majority of its officers drawn from the Protestant Unionist community. This demographic imbalance was not just a minor issue. It was a fundamental flaw that shaped the very nature of the force. When one side of a deeply divided society holds a near monopoly on the power of the state, it doesn't inspire confidence in the other side. This was particularly evident during the Troubles, a period marked by intense sectarian conflict and violence. Nationalist and Catholic communities, already marginalized and suspicious of the Unionist establishment, came to view the R.u.c. not as protectors, but as an occupying force. Their grievances were not unfounded. The R.u.c.'s actions often seemed to confirm their worst fears. The R.u.c.'s overwhelmingly Protestant makeup fueled a deep sense of mistrust and alienation, creating a dangerous chasm between the police and the policed. This chasm was not just a social issue, but a security risk, as it undermined the very fabric of community trust and cooperation. This lack of representation had a tangible impact on how the R.u.c. operated, how it investigated crimes, and how it interacted with different communities. The consequences were far-reaching, affecting everything from crime rates to community relations, and leaving a legacy that would take decades to address. The R.u.c.'s reputation was further tarnished by allegations of brutality during interrogations. Stories from interrogation centres like Castlereagh painted a chilling picture of a force operating with impunity, more concerned with securing convictions than upholding the law. These patterns of alleged abuse eroded trust in the police and deepened the sense of grievance that fueled the conflict. We're talking about collusion, a deeply unsettling truth that elements within the R.u.c. were actively collaborating with loyalist paramilitary groups. Multiple investigations, including the Stevens Inquiry, uncovered evidence of R.u.c. officers passing information to loyalist gangs, used to target and murder Catholics and suspected Republicans. Imagine your own police force secretly aiding those trying to kill you. This betrayal shook the foundations of trust in the R.u.c. to its core. It was active participation in a campaign of terror that left countless families shattered and a community living in fear. In 1971, the British government, with the R.u.c.'s support, introduced internment, a policy allowing for the arrest and detention of individuals suspected of paramilitary involvement without trial. Internment was almost exclusively used against the Catholic nationalist community. Thousands of young men, many innocent, were dragged from their beds, thrown into makeshift prisons, and subjected to harsh conditions. Internment radicalized a generation, pushing many young Catholics into the arms of the IRA. Instead of quelling the violence, internment poured gasoline on the already raging fire of the Troubles. It was a policy born out of fear and prejudice, with long-lasting consequences. The policy sparked widespread protests and civil rights marches, further deepening the divide between communities. Political leaders debated the effectiveness of internment, but the damage was already done. Families were torn apart, and trust in the government eroded. The international community watched in horror as the situation in Northern Ireland deteriorated. It would take years of peace talks and ceasefire agreements to begin healing the wounds caused by internment. Today, the legacy of internment is remembered as a dark chapter in the history of the Troubles, a stark reminder of the consequences of policies driven by fear and division. Families of victims of loyalist violence were often met with indifference, incompetence, and sometimes outright hostility from the R.u.c. Investigations were half-hearted, evidence was lost or ignored, and witnesses were intimidated. It was as if, for some within the R.u.c., the lives of Catholics simply didn't matter as much. This blatant double standard further alienated the Catholic community and eroded any remaining faith in the impartiality of the police. It sent a clear message that in Northern Ireland some victims were more equal than others. The murder of Pat Finucane, a prominent Belfast solicitor in 1989, stands as a chilling testament to the depths of collusion and the R.u.c's role in it. Finucane, a tireless advocate for human rights, was gunned down in his own home with the complicity of those sworn to uphold the law. It's a chilling reminder that even in a democracy, the forces of darkness can penetrate the highest levels of power. The Finucane case remains a festering wound, a constant reminder of the need for truth, justice and accountability. The year is 1969. A year that would forever change the landscape of Northern Ireland. The place, Derry, Northern Ireland, a city steeped in history, now on the brink of chaos. Tensions between the Catholic community and the R.u.c., the Royal Ulster Constabulary, reach a boiling point. Decades of discrimination and inequality have led to this moment. What began as a peaceful civil rights march, demanding equal rights and an end to discrimination, quickly descends into a full-blown riot. The streets of Derry become a battleground. The R.u.c., heavily armed and prepared for conflict, clash violently with protesters and residents. They unleash a wave of brutality that shocks the world, using batons, tear gas and even firearms. The Battle of the Bogside becomes a turning point in the Troubles, marking the beginning of a new, more violent chapter in the conflict. The streets are littered with debris, and the air is thick with tension. For many Catholics, the R.u.c's actions confirm their worst fears, that the police are not there to protect them, but to control them. The trust between the community and the police is shattered, leaving a legacy of mistrust and resentment that will last for generations. Despite efforts to downplay allegations of wrongdoing, the truth refused to go away. High-profile inquiries, most notably the Stevens inquiries, confirmed that collusion with loyalist paramilitaries was a systemic problem within the R.u.c. These inquiries shattered the R.u.c's credibility, exposing a culture of impunity. The findings forced a long-overdue reckoning with the past and paved the way for the eventual disbandment of the R.u.c. The R.u.c's problems went far beyond a few bad apples. They were baked into the very fabric of the force, starting with their recruitment practices. The R.u.c. was dominated by Protestants, with Catholics woefully underrepresented. When a police force doesn't reflect the community it serves, it's not a recipe for trust and harmony. This lack of diversity wasn't just a moral failing, it had real-world consequences. It meant that the R.u.c. lacked the cultural understanding necessary to effectively police a deeply divided society. As the Troubles raged on, the world began to take notice of the R.u.c.'s controversial tactics. Human rights organizations documented a litany of abuses, unlawful killings, torture, collusion with death squads. The international community could no longer ignore the cries for justice coming from Northern Ireland. Pressure mounted on the British government to address the systemic problems that had plagued the force for decades. The calls for reform culminated in the landmark Patton Report, recommending a complete overhaul of policing in Northern Ireland. The R.u.c., as it had existed, was no longer fit for purpose. The R.u.c's controversial and often brutal tactics left a deep scar in Northern Ireland, especially among its Catholic citizens. From the ashes of the R.u.c. rose the Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, a new force tasked with policing a society still haunted by the ghosts of its past. The PSNI, with its emphasis on community policing, diversity and human rights, represents a break from the dark legacy of its predecessor. It's a work in progress, but it's a start. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most controversial topics.